Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
Since that moment last year when he tenuously stepped onto the central loggia of St. Peter's, the world has been transfixed by the image and words of Pope Francis. Though he's made no doctrinal changes, his musings on economics, homosexuality, and all points in between have created new expectations. Tonight, we'll discuss Pope Francis's first year as pontiff and what could lie ahead. Please welcome back to the program the president of the Faith and Reason Institute and editor-in-chief of the CatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, and from the Archdiocese of New York, pastor of the Church of the Holy Family in Manhattan, Father Gerald Murray. Thank you both for being here.
Great to be with
you
again.
Glad we're reunited. Sorry Father Landry's not with us, but he'll have to come along later. I want to share some images, and these images, I think, have really defined this first year of Pope Francis's pontificate. As we look at these, the embracing of the disfigured people, washing the Muslim girl's foot on Holy Thursday, paying his bill at the hotel. What is the impression left through these images? And is this part of the unbelievable acclaim and appeal we've seen for this Pope?
I think so. I think this calls to mind the way Mother Teresa made such an impact through her visible embracing of poor people, going into areas that most people wouldn't want to go into, and treating them as true brothers and sisters in Christ. The Pope is a very sympathetic figure because he wants to do what Christ did as regards reaching out to those who are in need of not only human consolation, but also the divine message.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's also another dimension to this as well, because it's not as if John Paul II and Benedict didn't kiss babies and didn't embrace people who were handicapped or sick or whatever.
So what's the difference?
There was that element, the buonasera, when he comes out. I mean, that defined him in the same way that when John Paul II stepped out and said, "Be not afraid," when he had been elected Pope, it really set the tone. But I also think that there were just those little touches. We all remember that photograph when he goes back to the hotel he'd been staying at, and he wants to pay the bill, and the joke was they couldn't find the bill because they figured he was elected Pope, and he says, "Oh yeah, I checked in under a different name." And there was just kind of a series of this backstory that reinforced that it wasn't just the public image, that was really who he was. This kind of
no, that authenticity that kind of broke through. But I agree with you. With John Paul II, you had an actor who really understood the power of image, how to communicate without using words. There's a lot of that in this Pope, I think. But he seems to, or the media has maybe, taken him a step further for whatever reason, and we'll unpack some of that. I want to bring your memories back to November 17th of 2013 when the Pope stood at the window of the Apostolic Palace and he held up that box of medicine, and what was contained was actually the rosary. Is this part of the unbelievable response? Here you have a man who's really not only conveying love of the rosary and trying to get people to pray it, but it's a marketing routine in some ways.
Yeah, I think this is not reported. This is a man of traditional piety. Remember, he had the Eucharistic adoration in St. Peter's Square to pray for peace in Syria. He's constantly telling people they need to go back to confession. He himself gets up very early every day, does his holy hour, prays with devotion. The Pope in the media sometimes gets simply sold as a figure of controversy, and he's much more than that. He is a man trying to lead people to Christ through the traditional means of prayer and sacraments.
Now, I want to get into some of what has caused, I think, such a media reaction to this Pope and the reason he's dominated headlines. Before I do that, if you have a question about Pope Francis, here's your opportunity. Send them to worldover@EWTN.com or call us 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980. I promise we'll get to them shortly. Now, it is these impromptu utterances that so many people have gravitated toward, certainly the media. Here's the first one. This one about gay people in the church. It was particularly a question about gay priests, so gay priest and the so-called gay lobby. Here's what he said. So much is written about the gay lobby. I have yet to find anyone who can give me a Vatican identity card with gay written on it. They say they are there. I think that when you encounter a person like this, you must make a distinction between the fact of a person being gay from the fact of being a lobby, because lobbies are not good. That is bad. If a person is gay and seeks the Lord and has goodwill, well, who am I to judge them? The impact of that statement, Robert Royal.
Well, of course, in this media environment, and I think there was a learning curve there at the beginning, where when he came in, he maybe thought about these things the way he used to back in Buenos Aires. When you're the Pope of Rome, and you make any remark about gays, about civil unions, about anything that is out of the ordinary, that is going to be electrifying to the global media. And unfortunately, as we know, that they tended to run away with that in a way that I don't think he may have had a very clever way of cutting through some of this this media static by holding up the box of the rosary. But this was a way that I think the media were able to get sort of grapple with him and get the better of him occasionally at these neuralgic points.
Is this part of the media allure for Pope Francis? They think they're hearing something that sounds like a major revolution, shake-up of Catholic doctrine.
Yes, and actually this statement, who am I to judge, has been echoing throughout the year, and I think we have to look back. What does it really mean? The Pope is saying, who am I to condemn an individual because of their lifestyle? The Pope certainly condemns the lifestyle itself. You know, he's talked about following Christ. That's the whole preface to it. If a man is following Christ, you can't engage in immoral behavior on that regard and claim that this is following Christ. The problem, of course, is the Pope is trying in charity to speak about an individual. The media thinks he's speaking about a whole class and approving of it.
I want to move on to this other comment which garnered so much press attention. People are still wrestling with this. This was an interview given just a week ago about civil unions. And the Pope said, marriage is between one man and one woman. The secular states want to justify civil unions to regulate different situations of coexistence, spurred by the need to regulate economic aspects between persons, as, for instance, to ensure health care. Each case must be looked at and evaluated in its diversity. Now, I don't see in that statement anywhere an endorsement of civil unions for gay people or otherwise.
Right, and he was a very strong opponent of gay marriage when it came up in Argentina. I hear that he was willing to accept other arrangements as a kind of a compromise, but he spoke out very strongly. There's a famous letter he sent to a convent of Carmelite nuns who were cloistered, that this was the work of the devil, seeking to undermine a major institution, namely the family. So I think that this is even more than just bouncing off a statement. I think that this is the media introducing something that clearly what he means by this is it's almost like maybe some circumstances of common law marriages. Yes, you can regularize them so that health care and other benefits would be available.
One more thing I have to touch on. The Pope at one point early on, he said, look, we can't obsess, we can't insist upon these hot-button issues like abortion and euthanasia and gay marriage. We can't be all about that as a faith community. This was not greeted happily by many people, particularly in the pro-life movement. Given all of that, what did he mean by that? What do you mean? What do you think he meant by that? And what has the reaction been?
What I think he meant is that the heart of the gospel is more than the moral teaching of the church. And this is absolutely the case. We want to preach the incarnation, the resurrection, the salvation of the human race. On the other hand, the church has to be sensitive to the signs of the times. This is a time of rebellion against natural law. It's a time of rejection of the notion of sexual morality as being something taught by God for all mankind, not just for Catholics. So this statement that the Pope made has an indication leading to broader preaching of the gospel, but in the current context, you have to answer the questions.
Robert, isn't he accenting what's beautiful, what's good, and drawing people in? Isn't this part of the reason that people are listening to the church?
Absolutely. I mean, he's got that genius and that charismatic touch. I would say about those phrases, it's unfortunate because, look, it's not nice to say that, hey, you're insisting, or hey, it's not, you're obsessing. I mean, obsessing is something that makes people feel a little, it's an unfortunate word choice. I don't think that he meant anything
but this
offensive.
Is off the cuff. This isn't I mean, this is what happens. So much of this papacy, so much of what's reported, it's reported as if dogma's been handed down from the throne. These are off the cuff comments to reporters and on phone conversations.
And absolutely, when papal documents are issued, they go through drafts, revisions, corrections, so that the teaching can be be absolutely clear. The Pope now is trying to answer reporters' questions, but sometimes the answers are not clear.
Are you surprised that the Pew survey, which was recently conducted, found that there is no, for all the acclaim, 12 million Twitter followers, and all the media, the cover of Rolling Stone, all of this, that there's no discernible, at least, Francis effect in the pews or in the confession lines?
I am surprised myself. My father probably has had a different experience, but when I've written in public, the Washington Post or somewhere, I get nasty letters. I'm a gay man, and I've come back to the church, or somebody else fastens on something that the Pope has said and claims to be doing something different that they hadn't done for the previous 30 years. What that Pew survey seems to show is that though the attitude, they like the tone, they like the openness, cracking people's behavior is a much more difficult thing than just getting their attention and getting them to say, oh, that's kind of attractive.
They're listening, but they're not there yet.
It's going to take more than a year of the Pope's example and words to get people to go back to church. One thing I will say, I think the Francis effect is reminding us of our need to actually help poor people individually and care for the sick. I think that message strikes home. I mentioned Mother Teresa before. Mother Teresa hit people where they live precisely because they know life is more than about pleasing yourself.
We're going to get to your questions in just a moment. I have to sound on this note. We've seen a lot of coverage of Cardinal Casper, who I think it's fair to say would be on the other side of the theological spectrum from someone like Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. Cardinal Casper was, assigned by Pope Francis to speak at this preliminary meeting just a month ago to this family synod, this big meeting of the world's bishops to discuss the family. In his opening address, he made a very strong, even an activist statement, that the Church must do something in the way it addresses divorced and remarried Catholics, that there must be mercy shown to them. And what he's really proposing is a bit of a revolution in the approach, maybe even the teaching of the Church. What do you read into that?
I think that Cardinal Casper is dead wrong, and I say that with respect to his office, but his thoughts, I've looked what he wrote, it contradicts what the Vatican said in 1994 in a document about divorced and remarried Catholics. This is not a mere disciplinary matter that we can change with the flip of a switch. The essence of marriage has to do with the union of Christ and the Church. That's what marriage mirrors. Infidelity to marriage cannot be rewarded.
What do you think we'll see as a result of this?
There were two pieces to what he proposed. The first was sort of a different approach to how annulments might be handled. It might be handled by a pastor or some other figure. It wouldn't be as legalistic as annulment has been. Now, we've got the canon lawyer sitting here, so I don't want to go too far with that. But you could at least, in theory, say, well, that's a kind of a reform that might help, given how many people seem to need annulments these days. But the other part, I think, quite rightly, a father says, really is a change. It purports to go back to the early times in the Church when people who were separated and remarried were allowed to go back to confession.
Right.
And he starts that argument, that's the second reform he's hoping for, and then pushes it to communion. And really, as we always know, even in this rather unfortunate circumstance of other Christian bodies being divided from the Catholic Church, we don't have intercommunion because that is really the point at which the ultimate communion and unity must exist. So if we're divided on the marriage question at that point, I don't know how we go all the way back to communion for the divorced and
even
remarried.
Cardinal O'Malley, whom I interviewed recently, we talked about this, and he said,
Cardinal Muller, the head of the Doctrine of the Faith, has said the same thing. It's quite clear. This would be a change in church teaching if communion were given to divorced and remarried people.
But what this suggests is that Pope Francis is perfectly content, though, and even, I think, enjoys the sort of public airing of these questions. He encourages them. Doesn't mean any changes are coming, or that and obviously he'll be the one who makes that ultimate determination. But it seems to me he likes the robust conversation, even if it's provocative, and even if it's from his own mouth, apparently.
Well, in this particular case, though, this is a very dangerous thing, and he's quite aware of that. There's going to be the Synod on the Family in October, and unfortunately, in the media, again, in the immediate environment that we're in, we know that there will be various pressure groups, gay groups, lesbian groups, others who will be there, who will be trying to hog the microphones so that they get at least an equal voice with the Church. So it opens a door. A conversation, of course, has to take place. The thing that Casper, I think, said that was most striking is that there needs to be a paradigm shift that in the way that Vatican II changed certain things, where it appeared that certain doors were closed, and then there was a different way of approaching things. So I think we're all going to have to wait and see how that
Very
plays
quickly,
out.
before we go, I want to share this with our viewers and listeners, and then I promise we'll get to your calls, because I see emails stacking up here. This is a little insight. This is Father Antonio Spardaro. Now, he is one of the Jesuits who interviewed Pope Francis months and months ago. He just did an interview with the National Catholic Register. He has a book coming out, and he offered this insight into the Pope's thinking. Put it up. He speaks in a very Jesuitical language, so we have to explain it. He doesn't make decisions balancing reasons. He makes decisions by discernment. So praying and trying to feel the Spirit, trying to be inspired, balancing the emotions of the Spirit, not reason or logic. It's a completely different way of proceeding, a different way of thinking. What does that tell you, very quickly?
I spent 8 years studying under Jesuits. This is a classroom discussion starter. It's certainly not a conclusion that you would want the students to walk home with and think. Life is about logic and reason.
Robert Royal?
Well, it's always good to expand the horizon and to get more material to talk about. But I suppose the Jesuits are going to have to settle this one among themselves, because I have a feeling the Jesuits like the use of reason as much as they like the use of intuition.
Well, we shall see. We will be back in a moment. When we return, Robert Royal and Father Jerry Murray will take your calls and emails. You can reach us on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or via the phone. You see it on the screen, or world over at EWTN.com. And a pair of amazing nuns join us when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live as we continue our look at the first year of Pope Francis's pontificate. I'm joined once again by Robert Royal, editor of The Catholic Thing, and Father Jerry Murray, pastor of the Church of the Holy Family in Manhattan. And we are going to go to your questions in just a moment. World over at EWTN.com, the number's there on your screen. I want to talk briefly about what I referred to as the Pope in the backyard during our conclave coverage. Pope Benedict XVI, living out his quiet life, praying for the Church, and Pope Francis. What is the relationship and, more importantly, the impact of having Benedict XVI there present as Pope Francis goes about this reform? Robert Royal.
Well, I think we have to recognize that there are differences, obviously, but there seems to be some real affection between them, and it's clear that Francis was not reluctant to sign the encyclical Lumen Fidei that, in fact, Benedict had mostly written, and that was Benedict's last analysis of how he sees the world, which is a very profound and far-reaching vision about where we stand. So there are differences. I don't know that operationally he's calling up Benedict for advice, but it's good to have him there. It's good to remember that we've got this history, and that Francis is the Pope because of something that Benedict did.
Do you think there will be a reluctance to move quickly to change anything of consequence because of the presence of Benedict?
It will certainly be a contributing factor to look at whether the reasons alleged for changes are sufficient. Now, for instance, as regards the Roman Curia, Pope Benedict came into office 2005 having said previously we need to reform the Roman Curia.
Right.
He never really got around to it. Pope Francis is now doing that, and I think Pope Benedict the Emeritus is now very happy about that. Cardinal Pell being named head of the Economic Administration, Secretariat. Big move, a very positive move in my opinion. I think it's going to produce good results.
We have a question that came in. This is from Ralph Briggs. He writes, why does everything the Pope says have to be interpreted? It seems confusing, and is there anything we can do about the media's coverage of the Pope's statements?
Well, this is a Pope who speaks, as we were saying earlier, in a more off-the-cuff, less formal kind of way. I think that John Paul and Benedict were brought up in a different era and in a different context where they were very disciplined about the way they talked about things. This is a Pope who takes risks, and he knows that he's taking risks, and he's said openly, sometimes when I'm kind of speaking off the cuff, I don't always formulate the things the best possible, but it's part of his I think his program to go to what he calls the existential peripheries, to kind of reach out and on the spur of the moment try to engage people. It has its positive side, and obviously when it leads the media into temptation or worse, it's got its negative side.
Yeah, yeah. Father, you wanted to add something?
Well, in the apostolic exhortation, he said the thing about sermons is there are two bad things. Priests have to write them and people have to listen to them. So he's telling jokes about what we do as priests in parishes. Not everyone appreciates that. On the other hand, there's a point in injecting humor sometimes into the discussion.
I want to go to the phones. Marie from New York, you're on the World Over Live. Very quickly, what's your question?
Oh, I'm so glad that you took my phone call. Ironically, today I had a very big discussion with some friends of mine, all Catholic, and it all pertained to abortion, same-sex marriage, and everything. Mm-hmm. Now, they feel that if it was really that bad, see, they're interpreting everything the way the news media is, covering it. And also with Governor Cuomo, when he said, if you're pro-life, you could leave the state of New York. Now, I get into heated discussions because my family is very pro-life.
Marie, I need a question because otherwise I won't be able to get to anybody else.
Okay.
I love hearing you, but we can talk later.
What are they doing with people like Governor Cuomo? Because it's very hard to defend these rights, and nobody's publicly saying anything.
I think I get your point, Marie. Public Catholics who are in some way dissenting from church teaching, and they're using the papal comments as justification for their positions. Right. Dangerous?
Very, very dangerous. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, who's been a very strong supporter of abortion, is about to receive an award, I think, this week from Planned Parenthood. And she's a very prominent, vocal Catholic, makes no bones about being a Catholic. So the problem that the caller raised is a serious one. Someone just said to me today, I sometimes wrestle with why I have to go to confession for these sort of small sins that I commit when I see public people not being rebuked by bishops, allowing to go on as public Catholics.
Yeah, no, it's a real challenge. I want to bring something up before we go back to the questions. There is this other quote that just emerged where the Pope said, "I've never understood the expression non-negotiable values." Now, this was really a formulation that Benedict crafted. It seems the Pope is wanting to stress the mercy and love, and that he thinks fighting over so-called non-negotiables is verboten and something we shouldn't do.
I'm going to suggest that this reflects his experience in Argentina, where the Catholic Church had a lot of sway over public morals and legislatures for years. Only recently did they enact laws against Catholic morality. In those instances, perhaps behind-the-scenes negotiations are what's needed. When you live in a secularized society, as we do in the United States, the only thing these people respond to is public pressure and a call to conscience. And that, at times, will bring in some very sharp divergence, as Governor Cuomo, for instance. It's very clear that his position on homosexual marriage was completely opposite what the Church was teaching. And he was called on it by a number of people. Unfortunately, it didn't work.
Let's move on to a caller. Father Clark from Missouri. Go ahead, Father. What's your question?
Yes, I just had a comment that very few Catholics realize that our Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople was a personal invitation from Pope Francis to his enthronement. And they're going to be meeting again in Jerusalem the beginning of May for the anniversary of the lifting of the excommunications between the two churches.
Right.
I just thought that'd be some worthy news to pass on to you that...
Sure, no, it's an important point, and this is part of his trip to Jerusalem. Big trips coming up for the Pope. Jerusalem, Korea, very likely the United States in 2015. The importance of that and his focus on this ecumenical outreach.
Well, I'll say this continues what Pope Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict were trying to do with the Orthodox Christians, which is say, the cause for unity demands that we act. And by making these visible signs, I was very impressed when Bartholomew came to Rome for the papal enthronement, installation we call it now. But yeah, this is wonderful. Orthodoxy is really a key to ecumenism.
Let's touch for a moment on news that's really breaking today. We predicted when sitting in Rome that sooner or later the honeymoon would be over for certain elements in the church. Sure enough, this group, bishops Accountability has released a list of 42 priests accused of sexual abuse in Argentina. They claim that somehow Pope Francis was culpable, that he didn't look into these charges. Bill Donahue has sent an extensive investigation of this to all the bishops today. In his reckoning, these are all fraudulent charges. Many of these priests weren't even in the dioceses in question, and the others were exonerated. So it seems, though, that you have an element in the church, though, that's already trying to pick at Pope Francis from another direction. Are we going to see more of this, which we saw with Pope Benedict as well as Pope John Paul II?
Well, it seems very unlikely that Francis will not continue in the path that he's already begun and even impose more order in the way that the church globally handles sexual abuse problems. I think that that's indisputable. However, particularly as the frustration starts to grow, when we don't see gay marriage or civil unions or something becoming okay globally, or maybe some other issues that sort of the postmodern culture that we live in assumes are fundamental rights, women's issues, I think we're going to inevitably see a lot of media stunts. I mean, you can call this a media stunt. And it's kind of a bad thing to put out names of 42 people who may or may not be guilty of something.
Right. Well, some who clearly, according to Bill Donahue and the Catholic League, are not guilty.
Yeah, and look, it's just basic decency to assume people are innocent until proven guilty.
We have other questions, and gosh, I've got piles of them here. They're asking, do you think, this is from Josh, do you think the Holy Father may call a third Vatican Council, with this one concentrated on bringing other Christian denominations back into the Church?
I haven't heard that yet, and I'd be very surprised. He's set out a number of things he wants to do, particularly the reform of the Roman Curia, which is going to take some time. I don't think, and I would say also, a lot of people would say we're spending a lot of time trying to digest Vatican II. We don't need Vatican III right now. The unity of Christians is something that doesn't depend on a council either. It depends on concrete action and prayer.
Good point. People are asking, what is the relationship between Benedict and Pope Francis? And they're also asking, are you concerned about the good Pope, bad Pope narrative in the media? Robert Royal.
Well, I think that Benedict has taken a lot of punches, and I think one of the nefarious elements in the way the media handles Francis is to use him to throw punches at Benedict.
Or to diminish Benedict to raise up Francis.
When in fact there's a lot of continuity. I mean, Father talked earlier about the traditional prayer practices and the rosary. I mean, he says all 15 decades of the rosary every day, contemplation. There are large continuities, but there are also going to be differences. I think those are a little bit over-exaggerated on the part of the media, just as a way to further reject the thing that they find most threatening in Catholicism.
And the Pope has said it's nice having Grandpa in the
Absolutely.
nearby, and it was his defense of Pope Benedict, who did enormous work to clean up the sexual abuse crisis over many years, pursued investigations that, frankly, there were a lot of people in Rome and elsewhere, they did not want those investigations carried forward. Benedict made sure they were, both as Cardinal Ratzinger and then later as Pope. When Francis came out and defended them, that's what raised the ire of this Bishops' Accountability Group, I think. Yes. They were upset by that, and again, the continuity implied there. Father McCarthy from Connecticut, go ahead. What's your question?
Yes. Jesus himself, paradoxically, talked on the one hand on the universal call to holiness and the high road of holiness, love God with your whole heart, don't even think with lust. And on the other hand, he emphasized mercy towards the lost sheep, the prodigal son, the woman caught in adultery, the thief on his cross. So the paradox is right built into our Christianity, the one that they're talking about, that Benedict and John Paul would stress the holiness in moral teaching, but Francis is stressing that, but especially stressing the mercy of God.
This mercy, this theme, this season of mercy, which he called his pontificate when it started, it seems that's going to be something that
Yeah, but I don't think we ought to lose sight of the fact that the first encyclical of John Paul II is Divus in Misericordia.
Well, yeah,
that's right.
Which is
after Redemptor
also,
Hominis, but yeah, absolutely.
Rich in mercy, and those previous popes talked about mercy as well. So,
and personal encounter, which was Benedict's whole thrust.
Oh, sure.
Sure.
But,
No, the media trope is mercy equals denial of Catholic doctrine. Pope Francis doesn't believe that. We don't believe that.
Okay, before we go, predictions. I know you hate to do this, but I'm going to put you all on the spot. I'll go first. I think, and I've said this before, once Francis is boxed into the corner of having to define doctrine, the Pope can't change doctrine. He can, he can change the way business is done, but he can't change the business of the Church. And my sense is when he comes out and defines it, that's when the media starts turning on him, because they realize these kind of notions they had of major revolution is not in the offing. It is the same revolution that's been quietly taking place for centuries, decades now.
yeah, I do other secular TV outlets. I'm sorry to tell you this.
Okay, you get a pass. I do too.
No, the thing that you find that's most striking is, yeah, they're interested in the mercy and the outreach, but they really want to talk about abortion and women and divorce and the homosexuality, all those neuralgic issues. And if those don't move, they don't really consider the change has taken place in the Church. The change of tone is nice right now. But I think that that's only going to go so far, and unless they see sort of the cash value, as William James once said, of what that mercy really means, they're going to grow a little bit
We see that already on this first anniversary. People saying, well, he's raised a lot of expectations. The tonal shift is nice, but...
Right. Well, see, the Pope believes in Catholic doctrine, and the world treats it as the Catholic position, sort of like what is the position paper of the Democratic Party, Republican Party today. Once it's become clear that that's not how the Pope views the teaching of the Church, which clearly it is, he is going to disappoint a lot of people, but he's going to encourage all the faithful.
Very good. We'll leave it there. Before we go, we will be reuniting in Rome for EWTN's live coverage of the canonization of Popes John Paul II and John the 23rd in April, so you'll want to look for that. We'll also be doing some special world over broadcasts at that time as well. News to you guys. Don't miss it. Robert Royal, Father Murray, thank you both for being here, and we'll see you in the Holy City.